Oh, how I love you. Thank you. That was so wonderful. Well, good morning and welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Rev Gy. I'm the minister here. I welcome you here in the building as well on the whole interwebs, whether you're on Facebook or Zoom. I'm delighted that you are choosing to spend this time with us. Thank you to all who are making this service so beautiful and possible. Of course, our greeters and Regina here, and our musician Chris, and you guys, the choir, and is there anything Judy can't do? And Steve back there, and Freya, and then all of you, because without you, it just wouldn't be the same. It's so good to be back. I just got back from Europe. I went home to visit my family, and some sage once said, if you think you're so enlightened, go spend 2 weeks with your family. Now, the only problem I see is that I skipped the enlightenment, so you can only imagine how this worked out. My time there was Alpha and Omega, so there were good parts and there were very bad parts. The good parts, of course, I have truly enjoyed, as a normal human being would. The bad parts, not so much, also as I would like to think a normal human being, well-adjusted human being, would not. Good parts. Seeing my sister, my middle sister, and her children and grandchildren, just absolutely delightful and wonderful. Then, do you remember my nephew visited me here for a couple of months? He came to the church a couple of times. Seeing him, oh, lovely, lovely. They got a dog, and so he has an older brother, and in their wisdom, they invited me to go for a walk with them, and I'm always up for a dog walk, so I said yes. Little did I know what they had in mind. It was uphill. We went for 6.5 kilometers, which is about 4 miles, uphill, downhill, very slippery because they had snow and ice. I didn't have proper shoes. Also, about a week or so before I left, one of my guys dropped a composite board on my foot, and I'm pretty sure I have 2 broken toes. And but it turns out I have tremendous willpower. I did it, and jokes on them, because I survived. I was pretty sure they were trying to kill me. That was wonderful. I visited. I wanted to go to Transylvania. I was born there. Those of you who don't know, I was born there and raised there. My immediate family now lives in Hungary, but my extended family lives in Transylvania. And my aunt, who is 96, she's turning 96 in August, I really wanted to see her, and I wanted to spend an entire weekend with her. So I rented a vehicle. I drove to my sister's, and the 2 of us were going to go over to Transylvania. Turns out I picked up some kind of virus, because in my wisdom I did not wear a mask in the airports. Maybe that wouldn't have helped, but I got so sick. So instead of spending a whole weekend with her, finally Sunday, we just zoomed over there and spent 4 hours with her, and that was wonderful. It was so wonderful. We sat there, and it's like somebody turned something on in her. And it's like she was reading a script, and she was telling us about the history of our family, of her side of the family. It was stuff I never heard. I don't know how is it possible. I grew up in this family, and I never heard about any of this, and it was mesmerizing. And she went back all the way to the 1700s. That woman has a wealth of knowledge. The only thing I regret is that I didn't record it. I didn't know this was going to happen. Isn't life like that? Sometimes we miss the most important moments because we don't know. If somebody would tell us, gee, this is going to be an important moment, be prepared, maybe then I'd be prepared. But we just don't know, and such is life. So she recalled all this history. And I listened to it. And I was telling Bev yesterday, we drove here to church, and she asked me, how was it to go home? And then I told her one of the biggest problems that I struggle with on a pretty much daily basis is that I think of myself as very underaccomplished and just pretty much a failure. And that's the reality of how I think of myself. How I may show up, what the actual reality might be, has nothing to do with how I feel, right? That's how I feel about myself. So then I'm listening to this history that's being recounted, and it's pretty much a continuous, like uninterrupted failure and tragedy. Uninterrupted failure and tragedy. And it's like, yeah, I get it, why I would feel this way. Because look at that. But it's also true that although it's jagged, it has an upward trajectory. And that is also true. That is also a reality. So I'm listening to all this and I'm thinking, there's got to be a meaning to this. Like, what does it mean? How does it translate to me today? Because, you know, I'm like the rest of us. And all humans are meaning seekers. That's what we are. So I'm trying to figure out the meaning. And so I'm diving deep and I'm spending time. And then I remembered that it's very hard, even though it's the past. We think we know it. It already happened. It's very hard to really pinpoint and nail down the meaning. So I'll take you back to history a little bit because I always do that, right? First World War. And when it's over, people come together and think, wow, 20 million people just died. How did that happen? How could we have allowed that to happen? What is the lesson? What is the lesson we need to learn and not forget? Remember, this is the war to end all wars. Where did we go wrong? So they sit down and they analyze it, and this is what they come up with. This is already in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and I apologize, I need to blow my nose. So this is the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and so the makeup of the battlefield has changed. There's heavy artillery, there are primitive but tank-looking things. So there is confidence now that if you arrive to the battlefield early, then you have a leg up on the enemy. So what they do, they always rush to the battlefield, and then just untold numbers are just massacred on these battlefields. There's a lot of confidence in this new artillery, the new way that now we're fighting wars. And so they think that is the problem. We rushed into this war. And because of that, 20 million people died. Then another thing happened. In the last 2 years of this war, the US joined. And news spread came to the US. Who said that fake news is new? My goodness. The news were that the Germans are crucifying the enemy soldiers. They are raping nuns and children. And so the news came here, and there were a lot of preachers who totally believed it. And they were preaching from the pulpit, and they said, this is what the enemy is doing. And this is terrible news. So we can't really process this. And we are confused and conflicted. We don't understand how this can be and how can we still be followers of Jesus? So things that they said were, we really think the reason Jesus was such a pacifist because he never encountered enemy as evil as the Germans. And if he would have, we promise you, he would have picked up a bayonet and would have stabbed the first German he ever came upon. That's what they were preaching from pulpits here in this country. Only to learn, after the end of the war, that this was not true. So they felt a tremendous amount of shame. Like, how could we have fallen for this news? And how could we have given that message from the pulpit? So now imagine the Second World War comes along. And we learn from history. At least we like to believe that we learn from history. So Hitler is on the move, and nations are slow to get in. There's this one guy in the 30s who keeps saying, folks, we're going to have to fight these Germans sooner or later. We might as well do it sooner. And this is this obnoxious little Churchill that nobody wants to believe. And little did the nations know that he actually was right. So the lesson learned was wrong. The nations were slow to get into the Second World War. And then the news hit the States that the Germans are rounding up the Jews. And they're putting them in concentration camps. And they're torturing them. And they're running medical experiments on them. And then they are exterminating them. And the preacher said, yeah, we've heard that news before. We preached it from the pulpit. And we're not going to fall for it again. And to their dismay and even deeper shame, found out later that they got to be wrong twice. Lessons learned from history that are wrong. So, what then? What then? What does it all mean? And then how should we be? Like, is there a true north then? I mean, we would like to believe that we can tell the difference between good and bad, right? Between right and wrong. And if there is a war, then one side is good and the other side must be bad. But there was never any war fought between good and bad, between right and wrong. It was always fought between right and right. To believe otherwise, we would have to believe that there was one side who said, my cause is bad, it's evil, and I'm willing to die for it. If you think that the Southerners thought that their cause was bad and not anointed by God himself, that their cause was bad, then you're wrong. The South believed they were right, the North believed they were right. That's how it is. And that's how families are too. When there are two opposing sides, they have that in common. They believe they're right. And then it's hard to tell that you're wrong, especially if you dig in. So I had this encounter with my parents. I went to visit them, and I spent a long afternoon and evening with them. And my dad always has the TV on, or the radio. And that day it was the TV, and it was blasting, and he's sitting in front of it, and he's like, yeah, nodding, yeah. And it was an over 2-hour-long show bashing the gays, LGBTQ plus community. I mean, just like, damn. And I'm sitting there thinking like, is he ever gonna like get a clue? He's met my wife. I mean, he knows I'm out. There's no confusion here. And this show is just like, oh, terrible. And I chose to say nothing. And I watch him as he's nodding in agreement, going along with it. I leave. I stayed someplace else. I didn't stay with them. Next day, I go for a visit. It's noon. And a show is on, blasting. And they're, again, anti-gay. And they're just like into it. So I said, wow, this local media sure seems to be very anti-gay and very militant about it. Mom says, as they should be. And I said, what do you mean, Mom? As they should be, like I said. These people shouldn't exist. This is wrong. And I said, Mom, you do realize what I am? Yes. And that is a big shame upon us. And it's terrible for me that you're that way. And then my dad says, yeah, G, at the UN, you don't know this, but the gays have taken over and you should see the policies that they're making. A, not true. B, like what have policies have to do with anybody's sexual identity? And so I just reached for my coat and I started getting dressed. And my dad said, what? Are you upset? And I said, actually, yeah, I find it very hurtful that this is your attitude, that this is what you believe. And because of that, I'm leaving. And then as I'm leaving, I'm thinking, damn, I go to these civil conversation courses. How did I handle this? Not well. I didn't feel like I handled it well. So what were my options? Stay there and argue? Stay there and take it? I just didn't see a better option. I left. Do they think they're right? I guarantee you, yeah. Why else would they talk to their own child like that? Do I think I have a right to my existence? Yeah, I do. Do I think I have the right to be authentically myself? Yeah, I do. And that's life. That's, again, this is what happens in families. This is what happens in neighborhoods. This is what happens among nations. We all think we're right. So, okay, what then? And you know the lotus flower? You know, the one that sits on the pond, and it's so beautiful. And then if you go underwater, and you follow the stem, and then you find the root, and you see that it sits in muck. It's what feeds it. We see the beauty. We see that which emerged. We don't really see where it's been, what it's been through, and what's still feeding it. So instead, we compare a lotus to a lily. And their realities are just very different. Very different. So when you are unkind to yourself and when I'm unkind to myself, I would like to remember and remind you that we're still connected to some muck here. We are all working out some muck. Our roots are still there. Our lives might look a little bit different, but the looks and the feels, there's sometimes a distance between them. So what then? And I think where it's at is working out the muck within ourselves. So the next generation that comes, they get to plant their roots in something more filtered, just a little cleaner, a little neater, a little kinder, maybe a lot more compassionate. So we can heal them, and in the process, we might just get healed too. So be kind to yourself, but also, if you have some muck to work out with another generation, do it. Do it. If you've given something unkind, if you've offered criticism that is hurtful, that doesn't support life and compassion, work it out. Work it out for them and for you. Both end. If you've received it, work it out. Unchain yourself. It's the only way. So when you hear that programs are offered with opportunities where you can work on yourself, do it. Just do it. And you know, my father is 87, and I think he's not going to change. My mother has Alzheimer's, so she's not going to change. But it sure would be nice if my father did. I mean, sure, I'll get over this. But if he found it in himself to process it and apologize, it would help. That would be powerful, not just for me, for him too, but it would help me. So I would like to think that as I'm healing myself, I'm also looking through the places where I owe someone an apology, because it helps. Not just them, but me too. So do the same. Do the same. Look through it, be honest. You're not too young and you're not too old. To step up, to process, filter that muck, clean it. We all have it. It looks a little different for all of us. It smells a little different for all of us. But folks, it's there. So I say, instead of trying to learn lessons that are unlearnable, work on this. So what we have to offer will definitely have an upward trajectory for the generations to come. And so it is.